Have we checked everybody's that's showing a PowerPoint presentation is checked?
We are only missing our colleagues from Honduras, but it's very, very early in Honduras. So we are going to make a change and Georgia will be starting. And let's see if Aminta and Emma are able to join the meeting. It's okay?
Okay. Yes, let
Thank
me
you.
start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Welcome to our EFO session. Just to do some housekeeping rules, we have interpretation available in all the languages, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Arabic, and including English. You can please select the globe at the bottom to select your preferred language. Please remain on mute if you are not speaking and switch off your videos. If you are speaking, you can switch on your videos. Thank you, colleagues. Have a good session.
Thank you, Salma. Thank you very much. So, hi, everyone. My name is Luis Eduardo Perez Murcia, the Policy and Research Advisor of the Global Campaign for Education. And I am happy to see you all here in this meeting. We are launching the Education Financing Observatory pilot results. And just to give you kind of a background about the observatory very quickly, the Global Campaign for Education launched in 2021, the Education Financing Observatory, primarily aiming to understand a fundamental question, whether and how governments are investing the maximum of resources available to secure everyone's rights to education. It looks like a simple question, but I do believe it's a fundamental one because in my understanding, there are no other observatories looking at these very important questions. And we need to look at that because it's important to see if governments are really investing the resources needed to respect, protect, and fulfill everyone's right to education. So rather than rolling out the Education Financing Observatory across all our regions and with all our members, we decide instead to develop what we call an pilot exercise to test what? To test the methodology, to test the framework. That framework is linking three different concepts but interrelated. The right to education, the so-called for S for financing education, the size of the budget, the share, the sensitivity and scrutiny, and also sustainable development goal 4. Beyond that, we also wanted to identify the research protocol that provide guidelines for how to gather data around financing education and how to analyze the data from a human rights-based perspective work. And in accordance with our members with regional and national coalitions, we decide to launch the observatory in 4 countries: Georgia, Honduras, Somalia, and Tanzania. In all these countries, we were able to create a team, a partnership between a researcher with experience in the fields of education and financing and the national coalitions to develop a report addressing the question I already mentioned, whether and how governments are investing the maximum resources to fulfill everyone's right to education. And today we have the opportunity to hear 2 presentations from each country. First of all, we are going to hear for each country the researchers sharing some of the critical findings, how financing education is working in the country, what are the problems and what are the issues that we need to take about for advocating for the rights to education. And then we will have the national coordinator for the country reflecting on the experience, what went well, what needs to be improved, and fundamentally how the national coalition is expecting to use the research for advocating for the right to education and campaigning for that. So just to show you the agenda that we have for today. So we were expecting to hear, first of all, Honduras, but my colleagues from Honduras have not been able to join. I honestly don't know the reason. Hopefully, they come later. So I am just changing the agenda. First of all, we are going to hear Georgia, the Georgian Coalition for Education for All. First of all, Mr. Simon Janasha, and then George Santuria. Hopefully by that time, Emma and Aminta Navarro from the Foro Dakar Honduras will be joining us and will be presenting. After that, we will have a break, 5 minutes. Following that, we will hear Suad Abdullah and Adan Mohammed from the Education for All Somalia Coalition. And finally, we will have Deogratian Mahangila and Ochola Wayoga sharing their experience in Tanzania. After all the presentation, we are going to have 20 minutes for a Q&A, and it will be moderated by my colleague, Bernard Muñoz Villalobos. And finally, we are going to hear some closing words and some reflections about the future of the observatory from our global coordinator, Gran Casabonjete. So that's all from my side. I am now going to give the floor to Mr. Simon Janachia. Over to you, Simon, and thank you all for making time for this seminar. Over to you, Simon.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to present the findings from Georgia. As you all know, we're trying to address the question whether and how governments are investing the maximum of resources available to effectively protect and fulfill everyone's right to education. And in order to do that, I had to draw on two resources. One that was sorry. Okay, thanks. So first group of data was gathered from publicly available resources. This is financial data such as national budgets or the budget of the Ministry of Education and Science. The municipalities that are in charge of primary education, they also post their budgets online, and then there are statistical data available on the website of the agency that is publishing the national statistical data. But in order to understand how these resources are being are channeled from authorities to the institutions, I also gathered data. So how much funds were transferred either to individual schools or to individual universities as well, and that helped a lot to understand what was going on. So to address the question directly from the very beginning, the research shows that the government is not allocating maximum of resources to the education, which can be seen in two figures. One, the share of the GDP or the government expenditure as a share of the GDP is lower than it would be expected according to Washington Declaration. It is in the last years it has been declining, which is also alarming, and is below even 3.5% and way below the target of at least having 4%. Also, the government expenditure on education is way below the internationally more or less agreed figures of 15 to 20%. The total government expenditure in the last years has dropped under 10% as well. So we have a negative trend here as well. So the study also showed that in different subsectors, the funding is developing, or the trend is also different. We can see from the data that the general education funding is growing in the years that we studied. This is from 2015 to 2021. And also the preschool funding, which is funded by the municipalities in Georgia, is also growing. But we see also that the higher education funds are decreasing, and the funds that are allocated for scientific research is also not showing any positive trends. So it was also interesting to understand the share of each subsector into the overall funding. And here we see that the trends are more or less same and is stable within the subsectors. It was interesting to see that unlike the general conception in Georgia, Georgian government does not allocate much of the funding to the private institutions, and most of the funding, so 97% of the public funds go to the public schools in this case, and only 3 go to the private educational institutions. But what is or what could be understood as problematic is that the funds that are channeled to the private institutions is in 2/3 of the cases goes to the for-profit institutions, which also shows that the private education in Georgia is considered as a commercial enterprise and not as a it is not institutionalized as something that is providing public good to the public. So this might be a problematic part of the education system in Georgia. In higher education, the share of the funds channeled to the private institutions is much higher. So in comparison to the general education, where only 3% goes to the private institutions, here 15% is allocated to private institutions. And also in this case, most of the funds that go to that are channeled to the private institutions, they are channeled to the universities that are operating as commercial organizations or as businesses that see their aim as producing profit and this is then creating lots of problems for understanding the value of the higher education as well. So in the study, we could see also an important difference between the funding of the preschools. So if in the general education, we don't have that much difference between different regions, how the educational institutions are being funded. In preschool, we see that if some municipalities are allocating as little as 5% of their budgets to the early childhood education and care, the others could be allocating 3 times as much, so up to 15% of their local budgets, so which show also the gap between those regions that are able to allocate more funds and less funds to the private to the preschool and the early childhood education. What was positive in the data that we gathered and during the analysis, we saw that it is positive that the government is allocating more and more resources to the children with special education needs, which mostly in this case, I mean, children with certain learning disabilities. It is yet to come that the group that is funded as special education children would also comprise those who are socially disadvantaged, which is not the case yet. But the general trend of the funds is going upwards. What was interesting to see was that usually these funds are underutilized, so there is more budgeted than it is in actually used, which is also alarming and shows that the system is not functioning probably correctly. And the number of the schools that are also providing the programs for the special education children within the general education is also growing. problematic part of the higher education, another problematic part besides commercial approach to higher education, is that the funding is allocated to individual students. So it's not institutional funding. So students are being funded according to their, mostly according to their results on the testing. And there are very few students. So in the last 2 years, it has grown a little to 5% of all funds is allocated on the needs-based grounds. But in general, 95% of all funds allocated to the higher education is devoted to those who can demonstrate higher results on some standardized tests, which is problematic in a way that those who are scoring higher on those tests during the entrance into the universities, they in general have better backgrounds. They are they have more advantages socially. They have better education. They have private tutors who are preparing them for these examinations, and therefore this funding goes also to them, which is a question which raises the question about the fairness of distribution of public funds. As of the international aid, only a small percent of the budget is depending on the international aid. What the study also showed was that the government doesn't have capacity or the will. I couldn't find out which one was it to collect the data systematically about how much of the donor funds, international donor funds, or of the aid agencies is really used in education. The only information that the government has is about projects which is managed through direct cooperation. So if the government is receiving directly the funds and then is using it for its own projects, then they know something about it. But if donors are funding the institutions or NGOs or other civic society organizations, government doesn't have any idea how much funds this comprises. This is very shortly about our study, and if you all have questions, I'll be glad to answer it, as I understand at the end of all presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much. And please feel free to send your questions using the chat box. My colleague Bernard will organize them for the Q&A. And now over to you, George.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Luis, very much. And thanks, Simon, for the very good presentation. And thanks for GCE for the support. Obviously, the coalition has been working on the education financing since its foundation. And we've done not the similar, but, the report about education financing in 2015 also. So it's been an issue for us, and we've been advocating for the increased funding for a long time now. And obviously, like in the media, after publishing the report, although it's in English and we haven't translated the report yet, but we might not translate the full report, but like a 1-2 pager of it. But it's been actively discussed, I would say, in the print media as well as in the television. Me and Simon both have been actively communicating with the media, and they've covered it quite intensely, I would say. But like in order to understand, and obviously like the coalition tries to advocate the issue, and we've been working with the government for many years now. We've been communicating and cooperating with them on many issues, but in order to understand the Georgian context, like you have to have the full picture. It's very difficult, obviously, to make an impact, especially on these issues, like on the increase of the financing, even though we've been promised a number of times by a number of prime ministers, and the prime ministers as well as the ministers are changing on a yearly basis, I would say, every 2 years. So like a couple of prime ministers, although they've promised that, the funding would increase and, said it would reach the international standards such as 6% of the GDP, but it never happened. There were different reasons. Sometimes it was the pandemic, sometimes it was other reasons. But like the global factors such as the war in Ukraine also affects this issue, as well as general policy and politics in Georgia. Just recently, the Georgian parliament is, discussing the draft law, which would very much make life difficult for CSOs as well as for the media, make life very difficult for us, because according to this draft law, every CSO, for instance, just like the Education Coalition, who receives international funding more than 20% of their revenue, they have to be registered as the agents of foreign influence. They have to register themselves as an agent of foreign influence, and they have this similar law in Russia and in other countries, under the Russian influence, I would say. So I mean, in this context, we have a lot of difficulties, cooperating with the government, and I would say that CSOs and the general public and civil society in general, not just organizations, but the civil society in general, we have other fronts of other fronts of battle, I would say. So I mean, in this context, somehow education financing is not prioritized as much as it should, and that's why our priorities are also in different fronts. So I mean, we are also very much engaged in these, discussions and in these issues and in these battles, and our resources are very limited. But obviously, I mean, we would continue to push the government, and hopefully the draft law would be changed, and also the education funding would be increased. But I just wanted to share these issues, because sometimes, like when we discuss these, ideas about education, I mean, the general policy and the politics, the context is lost. So I mean, and that's how, just for you to have an idea of what we are dealing with. So yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to cooperate on these issues with the government, and now we are like in the cooperation as well as confrontation process with them. So I mean, hopefully we'll be successful, but I mean, I believe much more is needed. But again, like, this was a great precedent, I would say, and an example, because like, even though like when we're discussing these issues that are related to education, the data is very much missing, the evidence is very much missing, especially in terms of education financing. So I mean, this report is very much useful for other CSOs, for other researchers, for other international donors as well. Because like, I mean, recently, for instance, UNICEF Foundation asked me for this report, because even they didn't have a lot of, data and evidence about education financing. So I mean, again, thank you very much for that. And obviously we'll be pushing this issue further. And thanks, Simon, for his tireless work. Maybe he also wants to add some other ideas about the issues that I've mentioned.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, George. Thank you very much for sharing with us this very important contest. As you say, we often miss the contest, and defining it without the contest is really difficult to understand. And thank you, Simon, also for the presentation. Great team. We are so pleased with the report and with the presentation, and I am sure we will have some questions for you in the Q&A. So now I will want to introduce my colleagues, Aminta and Javier, who will be presenting the report. It was supposed to be Emma, but last minute change. So we welcome Javier. Javier, over to you, and please feel free to share your screen if you need that. Hi, Aminta. Hola, Aminta, ¿cómo estás? No te oigo,
Buenos días.
Aminta. Oh, Javier. Ok.
Buenos días. Muchas gracias. Ahorita voy a compartir pantalla.
Muy
Buenos
bien.
días. Un gusto en saludarles y un gusto en reencontrarnos nuevamente en este espacio. Creo que después de escuchar a los colegas de Georgia, vemos que hay unos ciertos parecidos, ¿verdad? Salvando las distancias y las ubicaciones. En el caso nuestro también, ¿verdad? El observatorio, en el caso hondureño, ha tratado de darle seguimiento a este financiamiento que se asigna desde el sector público a la educación en Honduras, tratando de identificar cómo ha sido su comportamiento en los últimos años. Y partimos y siempre tratamos de verlo desde la perspectiva del derecho a la educación. Y ahí, primero es compartir con ustedes algunos hallazgos. Mire, en el caso hondureño, nosotros hemos visto que el sistema presenta bajos índices de cobertura, principalmente a partir del tercer ciclo. En Honduras progresivamente se construye un embudo desde la educación primaria hasta la educación universitaria, donde poco a poco va existiendo menos oportunidades para insertarse en el sistema educativo nacional. Existen también producto de una serie de factores que están afectando históricamente al país: corrupción, pobreza, desencanto social. Hay altos niveles de deserción. Muchos niños, alrededor de 70,000 niños, abandonan el sistema educativo nacional en promedio en los últimos años, y eso implica que poco a poco nuestro nivel educativo en conjunto va también bajando de cantidad de grados promedio que tenemos como sociedad. Otro elemento importante son los bajos niveles de rendimiento educativo, particularmente en matemáticas, español y ciencias naturales. Esas limitaciones de rendimiento también están afectando posteriormente las posibilidades que tienen nuestros niños, nuestros jóvenes, para seguir ingresando a niveles educativos superiores. Pero también en los últimos años ha habido una tendencia bastante marcada de reducción de la asignación presupuestaria. Si bien es cierto, hemos tenido un crecimiento en términos cuantitativos, pero en términos relativos ha habido una reducción de alrededor de 2 puntos porcentuales en la asignación presupuestaria en relación con el presupuesto general de la República. También ha habido, y compartimos con el caso de Georgia, también una reducción de la participación de la asignación presupuestaria en educación en relación con el Producto Interno Bruto. Hemos bajado alrededor de 0.7 puntos porcentuales, lo que por un lado expresa el poco interés que existe en el sector público y particularmente en la clase política del país en avanzar hacia mejores niveles educativos y hacia un mejor sistema educativo nacional. Y esto responde también a una tendencia que se ha venido construyendo en Honduras más o menos alrededor de inicios de este siglo XXI, de tercerización de servicios, de privatización o de municipalización de servicios educativos en este caso. Así hemos visto en el periodo también un incremento en la participación de la educación privada en prácticamente todos los niveles educativos. Hoy por hoy, la educación privada, por ejemplo, en el nivel educativo universitario implica prácticamente el doble de cobertura de la educación universitaria pública. Y eso producto de esa reducción. En el caso de la educación superior, en el caso de la educación universitaria, también ha habido una reducción del porcentaje asignado a la educación superior, pasando del 24 al 20%, una reducción de 4 puntos porcentuales, a pesar que por ley estamos obligados a asignar hasta un 6% del presupuesto general de la República a la educación superior en el país. Y eso ha afectado particularmente la asignación de recursos para investigación, para innovación educativa, y ello también impacta en la calidad de la educación que se está entregando a toda la población en el país. También hemos encontrado que el 96% del presupuesto asignado a la educación es financiado con fondos nacionales, pero también en ese 96%, la mayor parte del presupuesto, casi arriba del 90%, se consume en salarios. Entonces, la inversión para mejoramiento de centros educativos, inversión para investigación, inversión para asegurar cambios de manera sostenible y de manera profunda, también están siendo limitados precisamente porque no hay posibilidades o no hay rubros disponibles que permitan trabajar en esas áreas educativas. En promedio también se asignan alrededor de 50 millones de dólares de fondos de alivio de deuda para el financiamiento de la educación, lo que no es poco, sino que es importante, pero principalmente los fondos de alivio de deuda se asignan para gasto corriente y muy poco para inversión educativa. De manera general, podemos decir que en el periodo 2016-2021, el Estado de Honduras no asignó recursos suficientes. No asignó tampoco el máximo de recursos disponibles para cumplir con su obligación de brindar acceso a la educación. O sea, no llegamos al 20% del presupuesto general de la República asignado a la administración central, ni llegamos al 5 o 6%, que sería el ideal, del Producto Interno Bruto asignado al sistema educativo nacional. Y eso impacta o ha impactado en lo que podemos ofrecer a la población. Impacta, por ejemplo, en términos de cobertura educativa, impacta en términos de calidad de la educación, y esperamos, porque el año pasado también se inició en el país un proceso que han denominado refundación de la educación, que está dirigido a el diseño de un nuevo modelo educativo, un nuevo proceso de formación que incluye cambios tanto en términos de sectorización de los procesos educativos como de incorporación de nuevos elementos de conocimiento que serán parte de la currícula nacional básica. En el país, a pesar de la asignación que tenemos, que está ahí alrededor del 4% del Producto Interno Bruto, persiste la baja cobertura educativa y es una baja cobertura educativa que tiene un momento pico en la educación primaria, pero que poco a poco va disminuyendo en educación media y en educación superior, pero también tenemos bastante rezago en materia de educación temprana. Existe actualmente también un proyecto financiado con fondos del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo para aportar y a través de la campaña mundial y de la Alianza Mundial por la Educación para financiar educación temprana en el país. Esperamos en los próximos años precisamente que esa inversión empiece a generar beneficios para la población de primera infancia en Honduras, que tradicionalmente ha sido excluida de los procesos educativos. El presupuesto educativo en general, ¿verdad? Por lo menos en términos cuantitativos, creció un 10% entre el 2015 y 2021, pero decreció en términos porcentuales absolutos en alrededor de 3 puntos porcentuales, pasando de 17 a 14%. En este decrecimiento también ha mostrado cómo poco a poco el gobierno o los sucesivos gobiernos de la República han venido dejando de lado la educación como una de las prioridades de desarrollo. Y ello ha afectado y afecta actualmente alrededor de 500,000 de niños en Honduras que ni estudian ni trabajan, lo cual es bastante significativo en un país donde la población general es de alrededor de 9,500,000 habitantes. También en términos de la investigación encontramos que la información presupuestaria es esencialmente opaca, ¿verdad? Aunque en apariencia hay bastante información disponible, la Secretaría de Educación, pues también el Ministerio de Finanzas publican los presupuestos de la República y los presupuestos de cada una de las secretarías de Estado. En términos de desagregación, la información es bastante limitada. Hay poca información disponible, por ejemplo, alrededor de las asignaciones en cada uno de los niveles educativos. Y cuando se contrasta la información de los presupuestos ejecutados versus los presupuestos planificados, encontramos también que hay bastante movimiento en algunas líneas presupuestarias que pudieran aportar al mejoramiento de la calidad educativa. Otro elemento importante en términos de asignación presupuestaria es que hay muy poco presupuesto asignado para atender la emergencia o atender los casos de emergencia, particularmente producidos por fenómenos naturales. En los últimos años hemos tenido varias inundaciones, principalmente en la zona norte de Honduras, y la mayoría de los centros educativos han estado casi todos pendientes de reparación y no hay recursos asignados para poder asumir los costos de esas reparaciones. Y en otros momentos también esta asignación presupuestaria ha sido víctima de prácticas de corrupción que ha distraído recursos, en teoría, asignados al mejoramiento de los centros educativos, pero que en la práctica no termina llegando hacia los niños. A partir de este primer ejercicio de observación de la asignación presupuestaria, creo que es importante en el caso particularmente hacia el gobierno de la República en general, recomendar darle prioridad a la educación como un medio para poder realizar el resto de derechos humanos. La población hondureña pasa generalmente tratando de sobrevivir y tratando de cubrir al menos sus necesidades básicas durante toda su vida. Entonces, la educación es quizá una de las pocas opciones que tenemos para poder mejorar esas condiciones. Y en ese sentido será importante también que centremos que abramos, los procesos educativos no solamente en términos de educación formal, sino que en términos de educación continua para el resto de la población que no tiene o tiene muy pocas posibilidades y las que tiene esencialmente están o en manos privadas o están siendo proveídas por organizaciones de sociedad civil, incluyendo en este caso la coalición del Foro Dakar Honduras, que presenta y aporta herramientas de conocimiento para poder mejorar los niveles educativos. También en términos de asignación presupuestaria es necesario superar esos límites que nos hemos autoimpuesto en el presupuesto general de la República. Y espero que esa asignación presupuestaria adicional sea dedicada a mejorar la cobertura, a mejorar la inclusión educativa, a mejorar la sensibilidad al género y la sensibilidad de identidad e identitaria con pueblos indígenas y afrohondureños que necesitan y poder desarrollar unos niveles educativos. Por ejemplo, recientemente tuvimos un proceso de selección de magistrados a la Corte Suprema de Justicia y en ese proceso fue bastante difícil encontrar profesionales provenientes de los pueblos indígenas que pudieran competir en este proceso. También es necesario ampliar, para ir cerrando, el catálogo de registro del gasto público para que pueda visibilizarse mejor su sensibilidad y el destino del gasto. Hay que profundizar, particularmente desde la perspectiva de la coalición Foro Dakar Honduras, hay que profundizar el monitoreo, profundizar la veeduría y la auditoría social sobre la gestión del sistema educativo nacional. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Javier. Aminta, por favor.
Buenos días, Luis Eduardo. Queremos agradecer a la CME, a ti, a Bernor, a todos los que nos han permitido obtener esta valiosa experiencia del EFO y también pedir disculpas por la entrada tarde. Tuvimos dificultades, yo particularmente, para entrar por motivos de conectividad, o sea, no tenía en ese momento, pero aquí estamos. Ha sido para nuestra coalición, digamos, muy importante la realización del EFO, en el sentido de que tenemos datos, ¿verdad?, creíbles, que son datos de las mismas fuentes oficiales del Estado y que nos ha permitido poder compartirlos y poder presentarlos en diferentes espacios que ha tenido la coalición. Iniciamos en septiembre del año pasado. Me recuerdo que presentamos los primeros como unos pequeños avances de lo que habíamos encontrado en referencia a la financiación de la educación y cómo este presupuesto había venido disminuyendo a partir del año 2010 en Honduras, o sea, sustancialmente, lo que llamó pues mucho la atención de diputados de la misma Secretaría de Educación y en especial pues de la sociedad civil. O sea, en este sentido, el valor añadido para nuestro debate en la acción de incidencia ha sido fundamental y lo sigue siendo. En diciembre, que tuvimos también la asamblea de la CLADE, ¿verdad? Fue un punto fuerte en nuestros conversatorios el tema de la financiación en el país, porque la financiación en Honduras va hacia una mayor reducción, o sea, sustancialmente, aun cuando hemos tenido en este periodo del 2020 al 2021 dos huracanes que destruyó más de 16.500 centros educativos, ¿verdad? Y no ha habido, digamos, una política que diga de acción de emergencia para la restauración o la rehabilitación de la infraestructura educativa. Entonces, hay de alguna forma, pues se observa como una displicencia del sistema en relación a muchos aspectos de la educación. Tenemos también todo lo que es la migración de los niños, pues por el problema del cambio climático, o sea, los efectos de dos huracanes, y también por el cierre de la economía en el 2020, lo que ha significado que los niños abandonen la escuela. Pero ¿por qué ha sido, digamos, el EFO para nosotros que cuenta con este valor añadido? Porque podemos demostrar con datos que el Estado no está asignando los recursos que se requieren para la educación del país. O sea, para sobre todo la educación inicial, la educación prebásica, pero también la media, que es la que permite otros niveles de educación, se encuentra en total abandono. El presupuesto, que hemos también ha sido, digamos, como aprendizajes también, darnos cuenta que el presupuesto, aun cuando se dice que puede aumentarse, cuando uno va a analizar en qué se va a gastar, el formato no es de fácil, no son de fácil lectura. O sea, el ciudadano común, o sea, no puede comprender en cuál es la inversión del presupuesto nacional, aparte de comprender que pues el 93 a veces por ciento se va en salarios, y esto no es culpa de que es porque hay muchos maestros, no, al contrario, tenemos una deficiencia de maestros, es que el presupuesto no es y no ha sido suficiente para contratar los maestros que requiere el sistema y para complementar todo lo que requiere un sistema de educación pública, que incluye merienda escolar, incluye crear condiciones para el acceso, para la cobertura de los estudiantes. Honduras es bastante rural y en las áreas rurales todavía seguimos teniendo la mayoría de nuestros centros escolares con 1 o 2 profesores para atender, digamos, todos los 9 grados del sistema. Hemos utilizado entonces el EFO para ir sensibilizando y discutiendo con el sector educación, pero sobre todo con quien toma la decisión en el Poder Ejecutivo. Hemos hecho llegar 2 cartas a la presidenta haciéndole sentir el posicionamiento del foro. Hemos tenido ya 2 reuniones con un equipo de diputados de los diferentes partidos para presentar la situación educativa y la necesidad de ampliar la financiación, ¿verdad? El otro punto es la experiencia. La experiencia para el equipo y para el foro, para la coalición, ha sido muy importante. Y uno de los aspectos que ya lo mencionaba el abogado Acevedo ha sido también la dificultad de encontrar la información en un momento, o sea, y que hay instancias que están obligadas para entregarla, pero dicen, bueno, vuelva después. En algún momento tuvimos que hacer cartas para acudir a la oficina de acceso a la información pública. Ahí te piden que tienes que esperar otros 8 días para que te entreguen la información. Bueno, al fin se obtiene, pero ese también es un proceso lento. Es muy dispersa también las fuentes de información, y por otro lado hay diferentes instancias del gobierno que en ley colocan recursos para educación, o que el mismo presupuesto de educación transfiere, por ejemplo, recursos a diferentes organizaciones, incluidas algunos organismos de cooperación internacional, y que no se sabe para qué es el gasto, ¿verdad? Entonces es bien complejo. Sin embargo, yo creo que lo que nos ha motivado el EFO es a continuar con este análisis del el presupuesto nacional con el análisis también de que no es suficiente decir el 5 o el 6% del Producto Interno, sino que también poder tener con claridad cuáles son las partidas en las que se va a utilizar el presupuesto de la educación pública. Y en eso estamos trabajando para presentar una propuesta al Congreso Nacional donde se pueda hacer por decreto que se clarifiquen cuáles van a ser las líneas presupuestarias de inversión del presupuesto en educación. O sea, porque el presupuesto es como una bolsa, pero que no tiene control, digamos, o visibilidad la ciudadanía para ver en qué se gasta, y queda también mucho a la discreción del secretario de Estado o de las personas que conducen el presupuesto nacional. Como planes futuros, nosotros vamos a continuar, ¿verdad? Uno, hacer una presentación, digamos, el lanzamiento del EFO. No lo hemos hecho de forma oficial y que lo vamos a seguir alimentando. Tenemos pendiente esa presentación de esta forma, este lanzamiento contigo y con Bernard, Luis Eduardo, ¿verdad? En su momento. Y luego continuar actualizando el EFO. Y continuar utilizando la información para estos debates con el sector educación y con el ministro de Educación también, por la necesidad de que el sistema requiere de hacer también un gasto adecuado, porque no es el hecho de que se aumente el presupuesto, que ha sido también un poco el cuestionamiento de algunos diputados con los que estamos hablando, es decir, no, pero en el 2010 el presupuesto de educación era muy alto y no se tuvieron efectos positivos. Sí, pero lo que hay que ver también en esta veeduría o en esta revisión del gasto del presupuesto es si realmente el gasto se invirtió o se trasladó para hacer otras inversiones, ¿verdad? En este caso, pues, creo que ha sido muy provechoso y lo será. Y gracias, Luis Eduardo. Y gracias a todos.
Gracias, Aminta. Gracias, Javier. Nosotros encantados desde la campaña de seguir apoyando este proceso y muy contentos de escuchar todo lo que han venido haciendo y los planes futuros para el observatorio. So, well, now we have 5 minutes for a short break, 5 minutes, sorry, for a short break, and then we will continue with the presentation for Somalia and Tanzania. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back. The break is over. So, and now I will give the floor to our team from Somalia. So, please, Sua, take the floor. And feel free to share your presentation.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So much.
Yeah, we see that.
Thank you, Luis. I really appreciate for this opportunity to present the Education Financing Observatory for Somalia and to present the findings of what we have discovered so that we will continue to improve the rights of education for all Somali children. Can I share from here or someone is sharing there? I'm not so sure.
You can share from there. We see the screen.
Okay. So I will start. Thank you so much. It's easier if I share it myself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So let me slideshow. The outline of the presentation will be, we will talk about the context in Somalia. Obviously, we know Somalia is quite different. It's not the same as other countries because it's been in post-conflict for over 30 years. So that we want to ensure that we portray why the education system it is the way it is. We'll talk about the methodology, some analysis, limitation, conclusion, and the recommendation. And then after that, Adam will come in and talk about how we will going to use this report to improve education access for Somali children. So the context of Somalia, Somalia is located in Horn Africa and the borders 3 countries, Djibouti along the northwest, Ethiopia along the west, and Kenya to the southwest. In terms of Somalia currently and the last few years been having a recurrent disaster such as floods, droughts, and also infrastructure destructions, crop loss, and sometimes even death. And currently, actually, Somalia is on drought alert, which means it's under kind of emergency situation. We are not famine yet, but we are very close, which means so many Somali families are under really difficult situation livelihood-wise. We also in conflict currently, so I'll talk about that a bit more. Somalia is known to be around 15 million currently, but the last satellite census was conducted in 2014 by UNICEF, and at that time was 12.3, but currently estimated between 15 to 16 million. Unemployment rate in 2019 was 21.4%, and growth rate was 2.9%. So you can tell the gap where the finances. Literacy level is quite low, only 49% for male and 25% for female. Currently, there is a huge adult literacy surge from the government, and hopefully in the next few years, things will change. 60% of the population practice pastoralism, so it's quite nomadic lifestyle. So those are the kind of like the geographical. In terms of education, Article 30 of the Draft Constitution 2012 gives the right to every Somali child the right to education, particularly in the early basic education, so grade age 6 to 18, although now there is a process of including 3 to 6 into the education system. The right to education has faced considerable and challenges, and the major barrier is insecurity, particularly threats from the terrorist Al-Shabaab, which currently the country is in war. For the past 8 months, the government is in war with Al-Shabaab, and it's been about, I'm not not sure exactly, but about 6 to 7 districts has been liberated in Hirshabelle and Golmudug, and the fight is continuing. So that is another added difficulties to ensure. And these districts and towns have been in siege for 15 years. So those children never had education for those number of years. So that is, again, something that has come up since the report that I like to add it to the context. In terms of methodology, we kind of used 2 tools. One was to look at the documents in terms of government. We've looked at education sector strategic plan. We looked at education JERIS. We do have yearly education conference that looks at the state of the education. We looked at module publication, project documents, non-state actor, among others. And we have kind of reviewed those data to ensure that we get sufficient information in order to report country level. But we also designed a tool that we have shared with relevant actors to give us information that they have that was not publicly available, so that we can cross-check the data that we had. In terms of our national budget, it kind of increased in absolute numbers year on year from 2015. As you can see, it started 2.3 in 2015. There was a huge dip in 2016. And the reason being is that it was an election year. The focus was on an election, and kind of the funding was rediverted according to that. But then it's gone up in 2017. Again, the trend was going up until we reached in 2021, again, election year. And every year, Somalia has currently working under constitutional federalism system, and that has kind of creates anonymity and conflict issues. In terms of commitment from the government, in 2017, 2019, the National Development Plan was, the plan was to increase domestic financing for 12%. But as you can see on our finding, that has not happened. So hopefully, with this report, it will help the government to actually understand the importance of increasing the national budget so that more children can access education. In terms of subsector budget allocation, we had really difficult in actually finding budget that goes to the subsector. There was no disaggregation data. The majority of the data that was coming from the government domestic financing was going to mainly on salaries, administrative work, so not much teacher salaries and government official salaries, but not much was going into actually infrastructure and education infrastructure. So the share in terms of the formula that we've been using by the that was designed by GCE, by looking at the share, the size, scrutiny and the sensitivity, was really hard to find data that fits that kind of formula in order to give the share of that. But when you can see that what we have found that the Treasury particularly, there's only one national university that is free, and it at the moment currently around 2,500 students that goes to that university, and which they don't pay any fee. They pay some indirect fee, but not much. So that was the only kind of budget that we could allocate subsector-wise, and some element of kind of salaries and administration. So that was the only bit that we could, and as you can see the chart, the education budget for the Treasury was slightly higher, so it was going up year on year. In terms of sensitivity, and I have spoken about that a bit earlier, when we were using the framework, it was really difficult. So the share of the national budget allocated to marginalized groups was not available, or was not disaggregated, so able to distinguish the budget. Public education was dominated by the private sector, around 85% to 90% is run by the private sector, and only 5 to 10% either community or government run. So that added a lot of pressure to the families, particularly marginalized families, because they can't access a free education. Where nomadic and pastoralist families, as we have indicated, 60% of those share, only 22% of their children are enrolled into the system. And that even fluctuated. So at least one child in every household, 60% of those are living with disabilities. But in terms of enrollment, was very few, only 9%, according to some of research that was recently done. 9% of those children were accessing school, or 9% generally access school. Those are that we identified within the school system. In terms of scrutiny, it was really difficult to find the budget publicly, particularly the government budget, apart from some budget that was available on the Ministry of Planning, some budget was available on Ministry of Finance, but in terms of Ministry of Education, majority of their budget they gave us, so there is not publicly available, although now they are working on it to ensure that it's publicly available on the ministry website. In terms of funding on the International Development Corporation, as you can see on the graph, its significant proportion is coming from international. Like if you look at a period of 2016 to 2020, out of the 145 million that came into the primary education, 8 of it was from the international donor. So education in Somalia is heavily reliant on international donor. So this will definitely need sustainable thinking of ways of how to continue when funding drying up, particularly in the current climate on economic development. So budget was available on the public sector. We could find all those budgets publicly with the websites of the donors. The share of the subsector, again, it was not that much of information, although majority of the international budget was going to basic education, primary education. So that was what we have found, but it's least developed subsector. In the last education support plan, 2018-2020, the subsector did not receive budgetary allocation from the national budget, particularly the ECEC, so early childhood, is the area that really needs to be looked at. But the government currently is made it as a priority, Ministry of Education, and now ECE curriculum framework is being in the process and the policy, and hopefully GPE has piloted about 5 centers, 2 in Banadir and 4 in federal member states. So that will be the start of ECE into the education sector, but that will need a continuous commitment from the government to ensure that the current commitment for 2022-2026 is reached, and is about 10.4 million, which I believe is not enough, but at least that's a start. There's not elaborate teacher training colleges for pre-service training, minimal investment in ECE infrastructure, and various private investors implementing different ECE curricula. So in terms of teacher training, yes, government now is taking some sort of responsibility in ensuring teachers are trained. Currently, the government pledged, and actually right now they're in the recruitment process, up to 3,000 teachers will be coming into the system to support increase in access to education from early childhood all the way to TVET programming. So that would be something the government is doing. As I said, ECE is the least developed, and hopefully that's something that the government will take pressure to ensure sustainability. Again, the share of primary sector was the highest, as you can see on the graph, 75.5 million, 69%. Am I done? Sorry. I will continue like literally 1 minute. then you can see that the enrollment rate is quite low. So we need to ensure that more children in school. Availability of teachers are very low quality because of the teacher training. Quantity of teachers are very low, and quality of teachers, again, because of the teacher training, is quite low. Enrollment, and we will be sharing this. People can be reading reports. The limitation is really important. Again, I would love the protocol to be used so that the protocol in the next 2-3 years, it'll be easier to report back. That's the conclusion. More needs to be done, particularly the area of segregation. So we use the 4A's scheme and the 3S framework. The recommendation is in the reports. People can read it. And now I'm going to pass it to Adam to continue to the things. I'm really sorry the short of time, but there's a lot of information that I wanted to explain. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Sua. Thank you very much. Don't worry, we will be sharing the presentation with all the people attending, and we will put in our Learning Hub. Thank you, Sua, and over to you, Adam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Can you see my slide?
No. Maybe you need to stop sharing, Sua.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think this is where he starts, but he can share it from his end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Vijay. Can you now see it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Saad, and thank you very much, Luis, for giving us the chance to explore and see education finance in Somalia. Thank you very much, Saad, for the explanation of the Education Finance Observatory report and the status of Somalia in education financing. My name is Adam Mohammed, the coordinator of Somali Coalition for Education for All. I'm going to explain our reflection on our reflection of 4 main issues, which requested by the GCE program team. Before, let me explain about the country context. In the latest report is produced by the Ministry of Education shows only a quarter of school-aged children have access to education, which means 3 out of the 4 of every child do not go to school, which means that insecurity and poverty pushed them more than 3 million children to be out of school. And the funding for education is still poor, although the government pledged to increase, but the public schools are very few in number. Totally, if I'm not wrong, last year it was 24 primary education up to 27 primary education, but we need the government to increase number of schools under the government management. The other situation we have in Somalia is the privatization. Privatization is still existing, and private sector is investing in education, which is very common and profitable. This causes vulnerable households from internally displaced people and poor host communities do not send their children to education because of financial barrier. They don't have financial resources to cope up for the food security and education. So they do not send their children. That's the general status of the country. The added value of the Education Finance Observatory for Education Finance in Somalia, when the consultant, Mrs. Suad, produced the report and we shared with you, from that date we started explaining the importance of education financing. Whenever there is what's called a local education group meeting, we call in Somalia education sector coordination meetings sponsored by the Ministry of Education. And we told all the education stakeholders that the importance of education is needed. From that point, this year, the government is now investing maximum of resources available to effectively protect and fulfill everyone's right to education. There will be an increase in the Somali Ministry of Education's budget for this year, up to $34 million will be the education sector budget. And the government is now hiring more a record of 3,000 new teachers. And today, all these 3,000 all over Somalia, they were sitting in an exam so that more than 9,000 teachers applied, and the government only wanted to recruit 3,000 out of this number. So the government wants to try to bridge the wider education gap. So within the this year's education budget, these teachers will be under the government payroll, and the government will take responsibilities. And the Ministry of Education himself told me that this resource is solely from the government, not from the international community. The government will pay salaries of these teachers. So these teachers will also be trained and to join the public schools. So whenever these teachers hired, trained, and start teaching provision in public schools, then we will expect at least more than 100,000 children will get free primary education. And today there was a education sector coordination meeting, and the government explained their plan that they are going to launch education for out-of-school children. They are targeting 50,000 up to 100,000. So we requested them to increase the number up to 200,000 children to be targeted in primary education. And we will see what will happen in the coming 6 months. Level of use of education finance observatory report in our advocacy around education financing. The coalition built partnership and alliance with the civil society groups in Somalia and outside the country. And in fact, we wanted to mobilize more people to take action in lobbying increase of the education budget. In fact, last year, with the support from Arab Campaign for Education, FSM, and jointly conducted education financing campaigns and influencing more education stakeholders to take action. In that program, it was under the Education Outlook Program, OC3, and which was focusing on education financing. So we created a hub of almost now we have a list of contacts of more than 70 scholars who are now ready to take action and to join our campaign in education financing. All of them are committed. So now this is a space we can start influencing the policymakers. We also, the share of the donor funding projects in education has increased since after continuously lobbying during local education group meetings. Also, Suad took a great role with our campaign, and whenever there is a meeting, she attends and explains the importance of education financing. Also, the children with disabilities should be given consideration. The lessons learned from the pilot project, the evidence-based advocacy researches in education financing are more influencing because when you want to approach a well academic ministry in a line ministry, for example, Minister of Finance or Minister of Education, he or she would like to read what research you have done. So compared to one-on-one meeting is to influence the policymakers. Even December 2021, we sat with the new parliamentarians. We wanted to create a space so that they will be ambassadors for us in the parliament. But that one-on-one meeting, it has not been fruitful. But the actual the research that produced by the consultants, Somali consultants, which is related to Education Finance Observatory, was so important, and it has clearly shows the importance of education finance in Somalia. The second lesson learned we have had is that pre-developed data collection template is helping us more, and it's more important because it has increased sector collaboration in this endeavor. For giving you a good example is that when we set the planning department of the Ministry of Education, they welcomed us and they gave Suad collaboration. Suad is an educationist who advocates the right to education for children with abilities. And when she was taking responsibility for collecting data for education financing in Somalia, the Somali University also helped them, the scholars, what's called university students, helped her in this assignment. So the government and the Minister of Education and the Minister of Finance showed us collaboration since we had data collection templates developed by our consultant, and the data collection template is given to us, the GCE. The third lessons learned we have had was influencing.
Sorry, Alan. Sorry to interrupt you, but you need to wrap up because time is over.
Okay. Influencing line minister in the Education Finance Observatory has increased the value of the importance to provide more evidence. So that's three our lesson learned. We are planning to build partnership alliance to lobby decision makers to influence increase education budgets. So far we had a good number of space we have created already, but we need to increase. Today also we joined with what's called Somali NGO Consortium, and successfully we have attended that meeting today. The college is also starting public campaigns to increase awareness of the importance to increase sector budget. So we need the public to understand that importance. And also we are planning to build an online campaign so that we can mobilize others to take action to increase education financing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Suad, for your presentation. And now I will give the floor to Deogracius and Ochola from Tanzania. Over to you, Deogracius. You have 15 minutes, and Ochola, you have 5 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
Good morning. How are you? I'm here with my colleague, Gilbert. So you will present first, then I will conclude. Welcome, Gilbert. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hello.
I would love to share the screen. Oh, are you going to share it for me?
No, you share your screen, please.
Okay. Share the screen, please. The project presentation.
We don't see the person now. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you. We had the first presentation initially, and in this second presentation, the emphasis was on answering some key questions. So we will go very much direct to those, to answering the questions. The main question was whether and how the government of Tanzania, for our case, whether the government of Tanzania has been investing the maximum resources available to respect, protect, fulfill everyone's right to education. On the right panel of the current slide, the blue part is simply an outline of answers to the questions, whether and how the government has been investing maximum resources. Government's investment of maximum resources in this context is related or is referred to the Icheon Declaration that requires governments to allocate between 15% to 20% of national budget to education. So we'll answer that based on this reference. Everyone's right to education in this presentation, this is how we're going to answer it across education levels. Okay, how has the government been allocating resources to childhood education, primary education, adult education, secondary education, and tertiary or higher education levels. Also across genders, and as well as allocation to persons with disabilities. And this is the category that is going to answer whether the allocation has been enough or maximum for everyone or everyone's right to education. The context refers to Tanzanians signing of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and SDG number 4 seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable education for all, and adequate financing to education is needed. Adequate financing is needed. And as I mentioned before about the Icheon Declaration, the requirement is for the government to allocate 15 to 20% of the budget. So this study simply, it monitored Tanzanian government's efforts to finance education. I will skip this slide, simply explaining the objectives of the study. We collected data from the budget speeches, the Ministry of Education reports, and other reports and studies. Actually, it's based on the limitations which we will present. We expressed our data in USDs and in percentages. So our processing of data was expressed in terms of percentages. And if it was an absolute or non-percentage figure presented, it is in United States dollar. Budget allocation across genders. This also was faced by a certain limitation. There was no data across genders. So we just used the gender-based enrollment. For example, 50% enrollment was girls and 50% was boys. Then we used the enrollment to divide the monetary figure allocation, and we judged it to say that this is what was allocated to girls and this was what was allocated to male or female gender. Let's go direct to the key findings and answering our questions. The first figure is telling us about the percentage allocation over time from 2016 going to 17 up to 2020 towards 2021. Percentage-wise, the education financing has been declining percentage-wise, and it is only once in 2016-2017 when the government of Tanzanian allocation of its budget to education, when it met the Icheon Declaration requirement of at least 15%. It's only once, and the remaining years, it was below that. So the key message that we can draw from here, from the total government budget to education, the government allocated fairly a good amount of its resources only once in 2016, 2017, but in the remaining years, we can say that the government has not been investing the maximum resources available in the education based on the Ichion Declaration. This is the first key finding. The second key finding is telling us about budget allocation across education levels. Across education levels where, due to data limitations, we did not access data for pre-primary or childhood. We don't have data for adult education. So much of the data which we were able to get is for primary education and secondary education. The data in this slide is just telling us that allocation to primary education has been satisfactory. The government has been investing enough resources to primary education. As we can see, in 2016 up to 2020, the least allocation to primary education was 44.6%, which is approximately 45%. And the GPE requires that at least 45% of education budget to be allocated to primary schools. Okay, the key message is, at least for the basic education of primary level, the government has been investing maximum resources. Okay, consideration of early childhood and adult education. Even though I mentioned that there was a data limitation, but we were able to obtain this data for only 2020 and 2021. I mean that financial year, 2020 towards 2021. And we can see that the allocation in primary education still met the 45% minimum. Secondary and tertiary education combined, the allocation was 30%. The key message is the government of Tanzania has been investing maximum resources for everyone's right to primary education. But looking at the adult education, the allocation has been very small, as well as for pre-primary education. The allocation has been very, very small. Okay, budget allocation to children or students with a disability. We were able to get this data. This data is in not in percentage terms, but it's expressed in United States dollars. Looking at the number is 100, let's say for 2016, 2017, the allocation, the government allocation to the education of children with disabilities was $120,000 US. And the highest was in 2020-21, $138,000 US. This amount is very small, as we can judge it, can be judged to be very small. And there is a reason for that, okay? On one side, we can say that the government did not allocate maximum resources to this category of people or of students, but also in the study, we identified there are many barriers. There are many barriers that stop these people to be enrolled. So as a result, one can just notice as if these people are not many, but the reality is they can be many, but the facilities, the school environment and infrastructures are the main barrier that stops them from attending school. And there are some socio-cultural beliefs and attitudes of parents and the society are limiting these people from enrolling. And therefore, the government may feel like there is low demand for this category as a result to allocate a small amount that we have seen here. Okay, gender sensitivity, whether the government has been allocating enough resources across gender groups. The key message that we draw, given the data that we have in the figure, is that the available resources have been allocated equally and fairly across genders, across female and male students. Thus, the allocation ensures everyone or every gender's right to education at all levels, as we can notice or we can see in the figure that summarizes our data. The other part was about foreign financing of education in Tanzania. There is an overall decline of foreign financing from 2017 and up to 2020, but it started to pick up in the year 2020, 2021. And there is a lesson that we get from this particular case. A lot of reports, there are reports that show that many education donors or foreign sources of education funding withdrawn, or they withdrew their funding in the years of 2017, 2018, simply because the government banned pregnant schoolgirls from attending school. And this, as we can see, the trend between 2016 up to 2019, 2020, the decline, but it began to pick up in 2020. It's because of the government's change of its policy when the government decided to return the schoolgirls to school. Now the foreign funding started to increase. This slide is a bit loaded, but the key message that we get from it is still the same message, that allocation to secondary education dwindled or it declined because of government's banning of pregnant schoolgirls. The same trend in this diagram can be noticed here also. Consideration of early childhood and adult education from foreign financing. The foreign funding prioritizes higher learning and basic education, when compared to secondary education. Basic education and higher learning or tertiary is more financed by the foreign funding compared to secondary education. Gender sensitivity from the foreign sources. We can notice there is also a decline of funding in years when the government was banning the pregnant schoolgirls, while in the remaining years, the allocation across genders was fairly the same, the allocation of foreign funding. Coming to the limitations, the study was faced by a serious lack of data from the sources that we highly expected to get data. The main source that we expected to get data from was the national budget documents, but the documents did not have enough data. But not only that, the really main issue was inconsistency of data availability for variables that we were needed to track. So we used so many other alternative sources, some research studies, research publications, the publications or reports of some education stakeholder organizations, etc., etc. Okay. The implication from the data limitation is that the precision and accuracy and effectiveness of public education policy is questionable. Public education policy should be based on data, and if data is not reliable and is not available, we can question the public education policy in such a place. Okay. This is the conclusion, but it simply summarizes what I've presented. Inadequate, or the government has not allocated sufficient or maximum resources. Primary education is more prioritized. Gender equality is achieved, therefore the allocation across genders or the investment of resources for equal education rights across genders is good. Allocation to people with disabilities is low due to barriers that limit their enrollment. On the foreign sources of education, gender equality is good, but government policy of banning pregnant schoolgirls that sharply reduced foreign financing to education. Therefore, the country's access to foreign financing education depends on its conformity to the global development agenda, because inclusive education is a global development agenda. And answering the question of governments investing enough resources to respect and protect the rights to all, the government of Tanzania failed to respect the girls' rights to education from 2017 up to around 2019. But at present, the situation is good. And as we saw in the data, or in the one of the figures, is that that financing of foreign financing of education started to pick up from 2020. So that is the end of the presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Deogracius. Perfect timing. And now over to you, Oshola.
Thanks very much. My name is Martha. I'll be presenting Ochola because, yeah, my name is Martha Makala. I'll be presenting Ochola in this 5 minutes presentation. And I will share my screen.
Yes.
I hope we can all see.
Please stop sharing, Deogracius, to allow Martha to share her screen. Thank you.
Can we see my screen?
Now, yes. Go ahead, Martha, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Deogracius. After seeing the findings of A4 results that was done by TENMET, we have come up with some key actions that we think they're important to be done. Number one, we have seen, we're going to talk about 4 elements. Number one is the value addition of A4 research in education financing in Tanzania, but also I will talk about how the A4 report has been used for advocacy around education financing, lessons learned from the pilot studies, and coalition's plans to continue to engage with the implementation of A4. In terms of advocacy, just like I have stated, we have continued to conduct advocacy at 2 levels. Number one is at grassroots level. At grassroots level, we have been engaging with members. As we know that TENMET is a member organization. So we have been engaging with members in conducting, in making sure that they are aware of participating in budget process at the local level, but also making sure that the local government prioritize financing in education. We have already done that in 3 regions, namely Tabora, Mwanza, and Mara. But also at national level, we have been continuously engaging with different committee, including permanent parliamentary budget committee, and we have presented our ask and priority area that we think they need to be incorporated in education financing. But also we have been conducting gender responsive budget workshop with the parliamentary budget committee to just make sure that they are aware when we are talking about the gender responsive budgets, looking into the budget in terms of re-entry. Is the re-entry having enough budget? Are the people with disability having a special budget? Is the teacher deployment have a specific budget, looking at the male and female teacher deployment, looking in both location, rural and urban? But also as a network, we have also been conducting PEDS workshops to our member organization at community level to make sure that the community is aware and they are holding the government and the responsible persons accountable in terms of the public funds to make sure that the allocated funds are really reaching the target population and they're not being misused by any chance, or there's not any public funds that are being misused. But also, we have seen that in 2016, 2017, at least our budget rank was around 16.15%. But currently, looking into the current situation, like of this year, is 13.7%. It has gone a little bit low. So we are still advocating for budget allocation to be at least based on the the international benchmark of 20% that has been set. But also we are continuous engaging in budget process by monitoring if our ask has been incorporated, but also just to make sure that we are all engaging in the entire budgeting process from the local to the higher level, just to make sure that the budget is, it's starting to have the initial people's priorities in terms of education, and it's cater for the needs of all learners in the country. But also we see that the diversification of sources of education funding is very important. Looking into the fact that we see that the foreign funding is shying out because of different natural calamities and outbreaks like war, like what is happening recently at Ukraine and Asia, is tremendously also affecting their economic resources of the great foreign funders to our country. So looking into the domestic resource mobilization in terms of financing education, we see it as a very key agenda also, that we are having a discussion as a country level and see a better way for the ministries, for the community to engage in domestic resource mobilization and allocation in education sector apart from the foreign aids. We are also continuing engaging with MPs. For instance, on March, we are planning to do follow-ups to make sure that our ask has been to monitor if our ask has been incorporated in the budget documents, and also attending the budget read session on May to just monitor and see exactly if the budget is gender responsive in the education sector. It has cut for the needs of all learners, including people with disabilities, girls around issues of re-entry. Is there a budget allocation on the implementation of re-entry, about teacher deployment also? But also we are expecting as a network to continue conducting pre-budget review that will be done on May to see also how is the budget look like in terms of gender responsive budget, in terms of our ask. But also we are expecting to conduct a post-budget review on July to also see that what has been emanated from our research finding, from our ask, if they have really come out well in the research findings, looking into the GDP allocation, looking into are we also meeting the 20% of the international benchmark, or we are still in the 13th or 14th or 15th, if there's increase or decrease of budget allocation in the education sector based on different kind of intervention that we've been doing. But also as a network, we will continue to engage in terms of the entire budget process, starting from the local level up to the central level, in terms of advocating for gender responsive budget that meets the needs of all learners, including girls, the people with disability, learners with special needs, but also teachers with special needs, and in terms of deployment and rural urban allocation when it's come to issues of deployments. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you very much for sharing all of these. So we are running a bit late on our agenda, so the time for a Q&A is now only about 7 minutes, and then I will take 2 minutes to summarizing and closing the session. So over to you, Bernard, for sharing this part of the seminar.
Thank you very much, Luis Eduardo. Well, in fact, I just have one question from Chiara Ronca. I presume that Chiara posted this question to our Georgian colleagues. However, it's relevant for everybody, I think. So her question is, I was wondering what is behind the fluctuation of the percentage national budget allocated to education? Is it linked to GDP fluctuation, national agenda priority shifts? And is increase of the budget allocated to the inclusion of children with special needs linked to a particularly successful advocacy from the CSO, academia, INGO side. So, well, I wonder if Chiara, if you wish to comment on this question, or we can go ahead and just listen others' responses to this. I don't have any other question in the chat box, and I don't know if anybody wishes to post a question orally. Otherwise, we can just go ahead and listen to the comments. Thank you, Luis Eduardo. So I wonder if maybe Simon, if you wish to respond, please.
Sure. One of the reasons why the share of education finance is changing, both in relation to GDP and then in relation to the state budget, is that this first of all, the state budget is increasing in proportionally with the education budget. That is, it's growing faster in some periods than the education budget is, and therefore the percentage declines in the last years. Well, in terms of the inclusive education, or the funding of the special needs children, the program started about 15 years ago or more, with the help of there was a coalition of CSOs who advocated for the inclusion of special needs children in the mainstream education. And then there was also a program run by the Norwegian government that advocated also beginning of the state-owned project. And then the program developed gradually. First, there was some like 10 pilot schools in the capital, then it expanded. It became also it became linked also to academia. The universities started to prepare special education teachers, and then it took off. So there were more and more people interested in the program, more and more advocacy, and now it has become one of the largest programs besides the general education program, which is financed by the state. The fluctuations in terms of this study, just to go back to the initial question, it also it partially, I mean, percentage-wise is not that evident, but it also is partially influenced by the methodology of our study when we were converting the local currency into US dollars based on the years, and the rate of exchange between the national currency and the dollars was also changing. So in some cases, when we're looking at the absolute numbers and not percentages, there's a huge fluctuations because of the conversion as well. So maybe in the future it would make more sense to fine-tune the methodology and to take the constant values for the conversion instead of having yearly exchange rates. To make it more clear how we are looking at the absolute values. In terms of percentages or the shares towards GDP and towards the state budget, obviously this wouldn't be causing any difference because the percentage would be still within the exchanges.
Thank you so much, Simon, for your comments. We have two more questions. And I think that with this, we can close this segment. The first question, I will read it in Spanish. ¿Cómo puede ayudar el observatorio a la incidencia global por mayores presupuestos para financiar el derecho humano a la educación? And then we have another one from Teva. I want to know what domestic financing mechanism is used for income education. Can anyone share experiences on domestic financing mechanisms in their countries? So what I suggest is that maybe we'll have some volunteers to answer both questions or to comment on those questions, and then we can close the session, if that is okay. So who wants to come first? Any volunteer? Okay. So Luis Eduardo, maybe you can take those questions for the closing and make a final remarks.
You're on mute, Luis Eduardo.
Thank you, George. So sorry, I was saying that we have only 2 minutes left, now 1, and I just want to share some of the key ideas of the session that maybe address some of the questions. So the very first key idea from this pilot exercise is that no country is really investing the needed financial resources to secure everyone's right to education. The second key idea is that the research is showing that there are many gaps and people considerably being left behind. Adult education in most of the countries receiving very, very little money. Second, gender is still a very significant issue in some of the countries. The idea that the resources are allocated with using this idea of sensitivity is also a challenge. We have seen, for example, in the case of Georgia, that there are regional imbalances that we need to take care. And finally, the issue is that we need to use the Education Financing Observatory beyond the pilot exercise. All the coalitions have shown how they have been taking positive steps to advocate for the right to education, engaging with the media, engaging with the governments, with the universities, sharing the results. And beyond that, they are also using the data to engage with ministers of education, ministers of finance, to try to identify what is next, what are the next stages. Marta had just clearly showed the plan. Just to illustrate with the case of Tanzania, is not just meeting with the people, but reviewing the budget, following up the budget, and all these kind of things. So this partly addresses the question of how the observatory can influence global financing. If we have this kind of exercise everywhere, in every single country, in which rather than saying resources are not enough, probably that is true in every context, but qualifying our arguments, showing what are the significant gaps, what are the issues around gender, what are the issues about the situation in particular regions of the country, and what are the situation in which different realities, conflict, hunger, as in the case of Somalia, heavily relying on international ID, or the lack of funding for teachers, or for developing learning communities, all these elements play a role, but we need to qualify our discards. And the Education Financing Observatory is significantly contributing into that direction. Next steps of the observatory. We want to continue supporting our coalitions to use the findings of these pieces of research to advocate for the right to education. And we want also to encourage all our members to develop similar strategies to develop the EFO, the Education Financing Observatory, to gather the data, and we are in the Secretariat more than happy to engage with you, to share our frameworks, our strategies to gather and analyze the data, and to continue role in the Education Financing Observatory in the 2023 and the years to come. Sorry for rushing up with all these ideas. Thank you very much for all the speakers for making time for this. Thank you all the people who attended the session. We will be sharing the presentations, and all the material will be uploaded in our Learning Hub. So that's all from my side. Sorry, because we are now 2 minutes late after the schedule. Bye-bye. Thank you, interpreters, as well. And